Have you ever wondered what it would be like if you were the President of the United States and you had a fly buzzing around in your bedroom, annoying you, zipping back and forth just out of reach? You'd probably do whatever you could to get rid of it, right? You'd swat at it, try to trap it, maybe even curse its existence. But what if, despite your best efforts, this fly proved to be nearly impossible to catch? What if it dodged every swat, every attempt to squash it, like it knew exactly what you were going to do next? You'd probably call for backup, right? You'd assemble the best and brightest of your team to solve this irritating problem for you. This analogy, while a bit far-fetched, might actually help us understand the kind of situation the United States found itself in during the 1960s. The fly in this case wasn't a mere pest, it was Fidel Castro, the leader of Cuba, and the US government was determined to squash him. But how? The CIA spent years devising increasingly bizarre and often laughable assassination attempts to eliminate Castro. Today, we'll explore some of the most ridiculous, outlandish, and strange attempts made by the CIA to take out a man they considered to be a major threat to US interests. In 1961, the CIA was buzzing with ideas, much like that annoying fly in your room. The agency's focus was clear: eliminate Castro and do it quickly. They knew that simply bombing Cuba or directly attacking the dictator might not work without causing a global political disaster, so they needed a more subtle and hopefully foolproof plan. The first major plan the CIA concocted involved Castro's infamous love of milkshakes. Yes, you heard that right. Fidel Castro, as it turns out, had quite the sweet tooth. In fact, he frequented a particular bar in Havana where he loved to order his favourite milkshakes. To the CIA, this was a golden opportunity. They believed that if they could get someone inside the cafe to serve Castro a poisoned milkshake, they would finally be able to eliminate the dictator. The plot seemed simple enough, however the execution proved to be disastrous. The plan involved placing a vial of poison in the freezer, where it would be discreetly accessed by an assassin who could slip the poison into Castro's milkshake. The problem? The vial got frozen and stuck in the freezer. When the would-be assassin tried to retrieve it, the vial broke, spilling the poison everywhere. The operation was a complete failure. Castro, oblivious to the plot, walked away from the cafe unscathed, and the CIA was left to lick their wounds and reassess. Not giving up, the CIA quickly pivoted to another idea. According to reports, Castro loved spending time walking along the beaches of Cuba, collecting seashells. This seemingly harmless hobby caught the attention of the CIA, who saw it as another opportunity to eliminate the dictator. The plan? Simple. Stuff a beautiful seashell with explosives, then wait for Castro to pick it up, and then detonate the device. At first glance, it might sound like a plausible idea. After all, Castro's affinity for seashells seemed like the perfect vulnerability to exploit. But as the CIA began to flesh out the details, the flaws quickly became apparent. What if Castro didn't pick up the shell they planted? Could they ensure that the explosive device was powerful enough to kill a man as strong as Castro? And perhaps, most importantly, how could they get Castro to pick up the right seashell? Ultimately, the CIA had to admit that their plan had more holes than they were comfortable with. The logistics simply didn't add up, and they abandoned the idea, moving on to something else. But the obsession with Castro's demise didn't end there. Next up was a plan that, on paper, seemed like a stroke of genius. Castro loved scuba diving, and the CIA saw this as another opening. What if they could find a way to infect Castro with a deadly disease? Enter the idea of the tuberculosis-infested wetsuit. The plan was to give Castro a wetsuit that was intentionally contaminated with tuberculosis and various deadly fungi. When Castro wore the suit, he would be exposed to these diseases, eventually leading to his downfall. Now you might be wondering, how exactly do you deliver a wetsuit like that? The CIA's solution was to give the infected wetsuit to a lawyer named James Donovan, who was already involved in high-stakes diplomatic negotiations between Cuba and the US. The idea was that Donovan, who had no idea about the CIA's plot, would innocently hand over the contaminated wetsuit to Castro. Once Fidel donned it for his scuba diving adventures, he would inevitably be exposed to the diseases, which would cause his death. There was one glaring problem with this plan. Donovan found out about the plot. He learned about the tuberculosis-riddled wetsuit before it could be delivered, and to his credit, he immediately refused to go along with it. He even went so far as to inform the authorities that he would not participate in such a scheme, thus foiling yet another CIA assassination plot. This left the agency scrambling for a new idea, but Castro remained a persistent thorn in their side. Despite the CIA's countless attempts on Castro's life, it's important to note that Fidel Castro's ability to survive these assassination plots was truly remarkable. Over the years, Castro managed to avoid being taken down by everything from poisoned cigars to exploding seashells and even an infectious wetsuit. His reputation as a seemingly indestructible figure grew, and in many ways, this only fueled the CIA's obsession with eliminating him. By the end of the 1960s, the US had invested millions of dollars into these failed plots, and yet Castro remained in power, steadfast in his role as Cuba's leader. Some of these bizarre assassination attempts, while laughable in hindsight, represented the extreme lengths to which the US government was willing to go in order to rid itself of a perceived enemy. Castro's continued survival in the face of these plots only added to his mystique and cemented his place in history as a symbol of defiance against US imperialism. The attempts on Castro's life were just one small part of a broader Cold War narrative. During this period, the United States was deeply invested in the idea of containing communism, particularly in Latin America, where Castro's Cuba stood as a beacon of revolutionary socialism. The CIA's obsession with removing Castro was rooted in the larger context of the US government's fear of the spread of communism in the Western Hemisphere. At the same time, Castro was not the only world leader to face US assassination attempts during the Cold War. These covert operations were part of a larger strategy of interventionism, where the US sought to influence and control foreign governments that were deemed a threat to its interests.